The wind whispered over the ridge, carrying the scent of scorched metal and disturbed earth. Beneath a shroud of synthetic camouflage, Sergeant Elias Carter lay prone, his cheek pressed against the rifle stock. His heartbeat was steady, breath slow, a practiced rhythm honed through years of warfare. Through his scope, he saw the enemy commander, a Varkari officer draped in dark battle robes, illuminated by the firelight of his camp. The alien's mandibles clicked as he barked orders to his subordinates, unaware that death was watching. Elias exhaled. The rifle gave a muted cough. The officer's head snapped back, a fine mist of dark blood spraying across the gathered soldiers. His body crumpled, and for a single, perfect moment, silence gripped the enemy camp. Then came the chaos. Shouts rang out in the guttural tones of the Varkari language, their soldiers scrambling for cover, weapons drawn, searching desperately for a shooter they would never find. "Damn fine shot," murmured Corporal Darius Kane, his voice no louder than a breath in Elias's earpiece. "Got a little something on his robes, though. Hope that wasn't ceremonial." Elias ignored him, already recalibrating his scope, scanning the panic below. Officers, specialists, anyone who would weaken the Varkari forces further if removed. The chain of command was a delicate thing. Snap enough links, and the entire war machine faltered. A captain darted behind an armored personnel carrier, shouting into a communicator. Elias adjusted his aim, compensating for wind. He squeezed the trigger. Another body hit the dirt. 2 for the price of 1, Darius noted, chewing something that sounded suspiciously like gum. "You ever think we should charge for this?" "Shut up and keep watch," Elias muttered. He had learned to tune out Darius's banter over years of missions together. If anything, the man got chattier under pressure. Below, the Varkari were responding, far faster than the last outpost they had dismantled. Floodlights snapped on, sweeping over the hills. Drones, sleek and insectal, lifted off from their charging stations, beginning wide-area sweeps. Elias's earpiece crackled. "Command to Raven Team. Confirm elimination. Target neutralized," Elias responded. "Camp is destabilized." There was a pause. "Then get out. Now." Elias didn't need to be told twice. The Varkari were escalating. Drones meant advanced detection. He tapped Darius's arm. "Move." Together, they slithered backward, keeping to the deep shadows cast by the jagged terrain. Their ghillie suits adapted to the shifting environment, rendering them almost invisible in the moonlight. Each movement was deliberate, measured. The first rule of sniping wasn't marksmanship. It was patience. Impatience got people killed. Darius glanced up. "We got movement." East Ridge. Elias turned his head slightly, eyes narrowing. Through his scope, he saw them, Varkari scout teams fanning out, sweeping the terrain with handheld scanners. They were methodical, thorough. The enemy had learned from past failures. A drone hovered overhead, its optical sensor pulsing with an eerie blue light. Elias pressed himself flat against the ground, willing himself into the landscape. The drone hesitated, scanning. The air between them thickened, seconds stretching unbearably long. Darius's voice was barely a whisper. "So, we had a good run." The drone shifted its attention to the ridge and drifted away. Elias let out a slow breath. Close. Too close. The scouts, however, weren't leaving. They were still combing through the area with grim determination. Elias made a quick decision. He tapped Darius's shoulder and pointed west. The terrain sloped downward into the ruins of an old battlefield. Shattered vehicles, collapsed bunkers, the skeletal remains of what had once been an outpost. They could lose the scouts in the debris. They moved swiftly but silently, slipping into the graveyard of past skirmishes. Bones crunched under Elias's boots, remnants of soldiers who hadn't been as lucky. Darius nudged him. "You ever think about what comes after?" Elias kept moving. "After what?" "This. The war." Elias scanned the ruins ahead. "We win, or we don't." Optimistic. No room for optimism. Just objectives. Darius sighed, but there was no time to argue. The Varkari were closing in. Footsteps echoed through the wreckage. Elias signaled for them to stop, crouching behind the husk of a downed aircraft. He peeked through a shattered viewport, spotting 3 Varkari soldiers moving in formation. Darius unhooked a knife from his belt. Silent or loud? Elias unslung his suppressed sidearm. Silent. The first Varkari didn't even see him coming. A swift strike to the throat, a stifled gurgle, and he was down. Darius handled the second, a quick, brutal efficiency to his movements. The third turned, too slow. Elias's pistol whispered once, and the soldier slumped. Darius exhaled. You know, they're getting better at this. They're adapting, Elias agreed. Which means we need to leave. Now. A distant hum caught his attention. Darius cursed. More drones. No, not drones. Elias felt his stomach drop. Not a hum. A growl. The Varkari had released their hunters. The creatures were shadows with teeth, bioengineered predators designed for one purpose: tracking and eliminating enemy combatants. Fast, ruthless, relentless. Elias checked his rifle. Bullets could bring them down, but not quickly. The best option was not to be found. We run, he said. Darius's eyebrows lifted. Tactical repositioning? Sure. They sprinted. Behind them, the growls grew into howls, and the ruins of war became a new battlefield. Elias had always known this mission would be dangerous. What he hadn't anticipated was just how much of a fight the enemy had left in them. And the night was far from over. Elias ran, boots pounding against the fractured earth, breath controlled but quick. The ruins blurred past him, twisted metal, skeletal remains of vehicles long since rendered useless. Behind him, the guttural howls of the Varkari hunting beasts echoed through the night. Darius was right beside him, his footfalls precise, his breathing labored but steady. The hunters would close the distance fast. They weren't just tracking, they were hurting. A burst of plasma fire scorched past Elias's shoulder, striking a rusted-out transport shell. He veered left, using the debris as cover, but the enemy wasn't aiming to hit him. They were flushing them out, driving them toward an open kill zone. They're smarter than I remember, Darius muttered. Elias vaulted over a collapsed barricade, scanning ahead. The battlefield was a graveyard of strategies that had failed before them. But strategy could be rewritten. He spotted a ravine, a jagged scar in the earth carved from previous bombings. It wasn't much, but it could work. Ravine, 40 meters ahead, Elias said. Darius didn't hesitate. I'm guessing we don't have time for a careful descent? No. They sprinted, plasma fire ripping through the air. The ground trembled under the relentless footfalls of the hunting beasts. At the last second, Elias and Darius threw themselves over the edge, tumbling down the uneven slope. Rocks bit into Elias's skin through his suit, but pain was secondary. The moment his boots hit solid ground, he was moving again, dragging Darius up beside him. Above them, the hunters hesitated, snarling. Their handlers were more cautious now. Good. That meant they weren't suicidal. Elias signaled, and they took off deeper into the ravine, keeping to the shadows. The walls loomed high around them, the path twisting in unpredictable ways. It wouldn't hold the enemy for long, but it bought time. Darius wiped a smear of dirt from his visor. So, tactical question, are we leading them somewhere, or are we just running until our lungs explode? Elias kept his eyes on the terrain. There's an old bunker 2 clicks west. If we can get inside, we can reset the board. Right. And do we know if it still has, walls? Elias didn't answer. Darius sighed. Fantastic. They moved in silence, the distant sounds of pursuit growing fainter. The night pressed down, thick with tension, the air tainted with the scent of burning metal and blood. The war had transformed entire landscapes into charred memories of what once existed. Elias scanned ahead, his mind already calculating variables. The bunker had been part of a supply line before the front shifted. There was a chance, however slim, that something useful remained inside. The ravine finally opened onto an expanse of cracked earth, the bunker emerging like a forgotten monolith in the darkness. The entrance was partially collapsed, but the reinforced doors were intact. Darius jogged ahead, tapping the panel. No power. Elias knelt beside him, unhooking a compact device from his belt. He attached it to the access terminal, fingers working quickly. The screen flickered. If we had just stuck to assassinations instead of making entire enemy camps implode, we wouldn't have to break into our own abandoned facilities, Darius mused. Elias didn't look up. You're assuming we had a choice. The panel beeped, and the doors groaned open, revealing a dark corridor beyond. The air inside was stale, heavy with disuse. They slipped inside, sealing the doors behind them. For the first time in hours, silence. Darius exhaled. I don't know about you, but I'm considering putting in for an assignment that involves fewer teeth trying to eat me. Elias ignored him, sweeping his rifle's sights over the interior. The bunker was stripped bare. No weapons, no supplies, just empty racks and cold metal walls. Darius crouched by an old communications console. Think this still works? Try it. Darius tapped a few keys. The console crackled to life, flickering weakly. The interface was outdated, but the encrypted channels remained. He activated a distress beacon, setting it to a low-frequency transmission. HQ, this is Raven Team, Elias said, voice steady. Situation critical. Enemy is in pursuit. Request immediate extraction. Static. Darius gave the console a light smack. Come on, don't be difficult. A burst of interference. Then, Raven Team, copy. Extraction window in 30 minutes. Do you have hostiles on site? Affirmative, Elias replied. Varkari forces tracking our position. Understood. Maintain your position. Air support en route. The signal cut out. Darius leaned back. 30 minutes. That's only, 29 minutes longer than I prefer. Elias checked his ammo. Better than nothing. They settled into position, weapons ready. The doors wouldn't hold if the enemy found them. 30 minutes wasn't long, but in a firefight, it was an eternity. The distant howls resumed. Darius sighed. Guess they figured out where we went. Elias adjusted his sights. Let them come. A heavy thud rattled the bunker. Then another. The walls shuddered as something massive approached. Darius peered at him. You're going to tell me that's just the wind, right? Elias didn't answer. The reinforced doors groaned under the strain of an external force. Something was outside, something far larger than the hunters. Darius muttered, I suddenly regret all my life choices. The metal warped, bowing inward. Elias steadied his rifle, exhaling slow. Then, with a sickening screech, the doors were torn apart. A shadow filled the doorway. Elias had a second to process the towering figure, the elongated rifle, the steady, precise movements. A Varkari sniper. Not just any sniper, Spectre. The Varkari's most feared marksman. Darius let out a low whistle. Well, that's unfortunate. Elias had heard the stories. Spectre wasn't just good. He was perfect. He was the kind of soldier who turned battles by existing. If he was here, it wasn't just to kill them. It was to ensure they never made it out. The alien moved with inhuman grace, positioning himself as if he had all the time in the world. His rifle gleamed, a sleek, deadly instrument designed for absolute precision. Elias knew what would happen next. The moment they made a move, Spectre would fire. Darius tightened his grip on his sidearm. So what's the plan? Because I'm fresh out of bright ideas. Elias took a slow breath. Every sniper duel came down to patience, to reading the opponent, to knowing when to act and when to wait. And Spectre was watching, calculating, waiting for the mistake that would end them. Elias adjusted his stance, keeping his weapon steady. He wasn't going to give him that mistake. The standoff held, a razor-thin line between life and death. And then, without warning, Spectre moved. Spectre fired. Elias dropped, the shot whispering past where his head had been an instant before, slamming into the wall behind him with a crack that sent shrapnel biting into his shoulder. He rolled, rifle coming up, but Spectre was already repositioning, moving with a fluidity that no human could match. Darius dove behind an overturned crate, his sidearm raised, but he wasn't reckless enough to fire. Not yet. Spectre wasn't an enemy you wasted shots on. Elias exhaled, scanning the room in fractions of a second. The bunker's skeletal remains gave them almost no cover. Spectre had chosen his entrance carefully, standing in the perfect position to control the battlefield. The moment either of them made a mistake, he would end this. Darius's voice was barely audible over the hum of tension. "He's toying with us." Elias agreed. Spectre had fired a near-perfect shot, but not a killing one. The Valkyrie sniper wanted them desperate, wanted them cornered enough to slip up. The next bullet would not miss. Elias adjusted his grip on the rifle. Fine. Let him think he had control. Spectre shifted again, barely perceptible. His movements were deliberate, patient. He was studying them the same way Elias was studying him. Darius tapped a finger against his thigh, the signal for a distraction. Elias gave the slightest nod. Then Darius moved. He didn't fire. He didn't need to. He only needed to act like he was about to, jerking his weapon upward in a sharp motion. Spectre reacted, pivoting, rifle swinging toward Darius. A fraction of a second. It was enough. Elias fired. The bullet tore through the shadows, striking true. Spectre staggered, the impact punching into his shoulder, forcing him to one knee. His rifle clattered to the ground, but he didn't collapse. He lifted his head, those dark, unreadable Valkyrie eyes locking onto Elias's through the dim light of the bunker. Not anger, not pain, recognition. Then, with deliberate slowness, Spectre lowered himself to the ground. Motionless. Silence swallowed the room. Darius let out a breath. I'm never going to feel bad about camping in a multiplayer match again. Elias kept his rifle train on the body. He had learned long ago that just because someone should be dead didn't mean they were. But Spectre didn't move. The bunker remained still. Outside, the distant sounds of war still echoed, but Elias knew their battle was over. The comm unit crackled. Raven team, status? Elias pressed a hand to his earpiece. Target neutralized. There was a brief pause. Copy that. Extraction inbound. ETA 5 minutes. Standby. Darius exhaled. We're actually getting out of this. Elias shouldered his rifle. Not yet, because the enemy wasn't retreating. A new sound rumbled through the bunker, deeper than the plasma fire, heavier than the drone whine. Elias turned toward the ruined entrance, just as the first of the Valkyrie reinforcements arrived. They came in fast, armored and armed, moving with the deadly efficiency of an elite strike force. Their rifles were up, scanning, assessing. And then their eyes fell on Spectre's unmoving form. The lead soldier let out a low, guttural sound. A war cry. Elias didn't hesitate. He grabbed Darius's arm, yanking him toward the back of the bunker. Run. Darius ran. Gunfire erupted behind them, plasma slamming into the walls, tearing through metal like paper. Elias ducked low, weaving through the wreckage, feet pounding against the bunker floor. He could hear the Valkyrie closing in, fast and relentless. They burst through a side door, emerging into the open night. The air was thick with smoke, the ground shaking beneath the weight of distant explosions. Darius was gasping. You know, for a secret mission, we sure did piss off a lot of people. Elias wasn't listening. He was calculating. Their extraction point was just ahead, a stretch of open terrain leading toward a clearing where the dropship would land. Too open. The Valkyrie would have a clean shot the second they broke cover. Elias scanned the environment. There, half buried in the dirt, the remains of an old anti-air turret, non-functional, but still large enough to provide partial cover. They sprinted for it. Darius slid behind the wreckage, rifle up. Tell me we have a plan. Elias took a knee beside him, checking his ammo. We whole. Darius groaned. That's not a plan. That's a death wish. Elias ignored him, adjusting his rifle sights. The Valkyrie were closing in, but they weren't charging recklessly. They were advancing in a precise formation, sweeping the area, ensuring there were no surprises. The only advantage Elias and Darius had was that they were the surprise. Elias took the first shot. The lead soldier dropped. Darius followed suit, his pistol barking, another enemy staggering back. The Valkyrie hesitated. Just for a second. It was all they needed. From above, the night split open with a roar of engines. The extraction dropship screamed into view, its side cannons blazing, suppressive fire hammering into the advancing forces. The Valkyrie scattered, momentarily thrown off balance. Elias seized the moment. Move! They sprinted for the ship as it descended, its rear ramp lowering. The gunfire intensified. Darius stumbled, a shot grazing his side, but Elias caught his arm, hauling him forward. The moment they hit the ramp, the dropship lifted off, the battlefield shrinking beneath them. Darius collapsed against the metal floor, panting. That sucked. Elias leaned against the wall, rifle across his lap, muscles still coiled tight. The comm crackled again. Raven team, mission complete. Stand by for debrief. Darius let out a weak laugh. Mission complete, right? Because this felt so damn clean. Elias didn't answer. He was staring out the viewport, watching as the landscape below shifted, the war continuing without them. Fires burned. Explosions bloomed like terrible flowers in the dark. And then, in the distance, something changed. A burst of light, bright, searing. The final strike. The human fleet was moving in. This was the end. The Valkyrie forces, leaderless and fractured, were breaking. Darius saw it too. His voice was quieter now. We did it. Elias watched as the last enemy stronghold crumbled into ruin, the fires of battle flickering against the horizon. The war was over, but the silence it left behind felt heavier than the battle ever had. He let out a slow breath, closing his eyes. Tomorrow, there would be another mission, another fight. But for now, just for a moment, he let himself believe in victory.